Hello, and welcome to another episode of the State of the UK's Transport, where I talk about different situations and predicaments the UK's transport system's in and giving my point of view on the situation. Today's episode is going to be talking about TFL wanting to take over the metro services from national rail operators. These being the metro services on South Eastern, Southern, Thameslink and South Western Railway. Basically the operators that run metro services south of London. To be clear, the term metro services by these national rail operators means the services that run from London terminuses to areas near to or within London. So not including their long distance services. To differentiate between the two, the metro services usually stop at every stop, and the long distance services, which are not the metro ones, usually skip quite a bit of stops. So you'll be on the train, zooming past a lot of stations. That's usually long distance. Metro stops at every stop. And these usually run at a more frequent service, whether that's 10 to 15 minutes compared to half an hour on longer distances. But again, that doesn't work all the time because there are a lot of metro services that have a half an hour frequency. The idea of TFL taking over the metro services and how they would do it was first mentioned in March 2019 in their report, with statistics of how far people travel to get to a TFL service and their plan to metronise most of the metro services. So their big thing is about metronisation, kind of applying an overground type of service onto these national rail services. Because it states in the report that you're very welcome to read that people will travel a further distance or via a different mode of transport such as a bus to get to a TFL operated station so they could use a TFL operated service. Whereas some areas a train frequency is every half an hour, whereas you could just get a bus to a London Overground station, for example, where a train frequency is either every 15 minutes or in some places every 7.5 minutes. And obviously that being implemented would make a lot of sense on metro services because it's commuter lines within London that who have a lot of traffic but their frequency just don't match up as much. So essentially implementing this type of frequency means that people won't have to travel further distances or buy different modes of transport to get to a TFL run station because these would be TFL operated with the aim of having a higher frequency so people could just turn up and get on a train. To be honest, what helps TFL's case is that they've done this time and time again. Like look at the overground network. Most of that was underused railways that took a bit of repainting, a higher frequency of trains, and bam. Every time the overground's been implemented in an area, it has received a lot of positive reviews and higher ridership. So it's a no-brainer. But we're taking over national rail operators' metro services. They did this with the West Anglia routes from Greater Anglia. And look at it now, using beautiful Class 710s for their services. To be honest, the London Overground agenda has worked time and time again, which is why it kind of makes sense why TFL wants to implement something like this on the metro services, as it will provide customers within these regions a great service they deserve. If you want to know why the London Overground is so great and why I keep rambling on about it, that should answer your questions. Thank you. With them also keen to building interchanges at Streatham Common and Brockley to allow the different services to connect with each other, allowing for better interconnectivity. So yes, TFL's main aim is to take over the services, modernise it, have high frequency trains that all kind of interconnect together. But let's do a couple of the pros and cons of TFL implementing these, with a couple of the cons being a bit subjective to me. So yes, TFL taking over would be great because it will all be under one body and it will be easier for people to travel through these different services. However, I don't know how they put it on the tube map because the tube map's already really overpowered and overpacked with different lines going all over the place, especially the orange. The orange has taken over a lot of the map. So I don't know how they would implement putting the also new metro services on there. Because it depends whether they're going to use the colour orange or not and connect it with the London Overground services, or they separate it, which links to my next point, as another type of service pattern, but also on the tube map. This could be easier to differentiate on the map, also still looking quite confusing, but a lot better to look at, as it will be a different colour. As it would work if they use a separate entity for it instead of using a London Overground entity, as it would be obviously too confusing on the map. And one service that's been freed up that has been used for a long time now is TFL Rail. They could implement the TFL Rail branding on the metro services and have it as TFL Rail and then the London Overground separate. But then again, this goes to a con, as if they do this, that means all the Thameslink, South Eastern, Southern and South Western Railway services will be under TFL Rail, which means the branding would be a bit bland. You know, Any of you guys that have been watching me for long enough now know that I appreciate my liveries. I appreciate the variety of different trains I get to see when I go out on the network. And if TFL do take over, it's the argument whether are they going to keep the separate South Eastern, Thameslink, Southern and South Western Railway liveries and naming and branding, or are they going to unify it under one name? And I feel like they would go with the latter, because that's what they did at London Overground. They didn't keep the separate names for the East London line. They didn't keep the separate name for the West Anglia lines. They all put them underneath London Overground. So it's whether they go and put it with London Overground, or they create a new one for these metro services from the south of London and use that branding for it. And with that, I'm not a fan. I won't lie to you. Only way I could be a fan actually is if they use the same naming, but they just had different exterior liveries as in the colouring. For example, the South Western Railway branding outside, the colouring of it would stay the same. Same with Southern, same with Thameslink, and same with South Eastern. But the name on the train would be, for example, TFL Rail, or TFL Trains, or TFL South. Oh, 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 oh. What could work is if they throw it back to the Connex days, is what they call that the Southern services, TFL South Central, and then Southeastern services like TFL Southeast, and then, you know, TFL Southwest, and the Thameslink ones, not sure, TFL Thameslink, whatever. But something like that could also be cool, and that will differentiate between the different brandings. But then again, the whole point of it is to connect them all together, so it's not supposed to have them separate. Yeah, I need to stop thinking about it as separate entities. They're trying to put it all together as one entity, so they're not separate. They're all within one. All within one. Within one. And yes, to go back to the pro side, this will allow for better integration with the TFL network and with their ticketing system, as the fares, I hope, would match what's going on with the TFL services as they increase or decrease, whether you go through certain zones at what times and so forth. And yes, another pro is about the map, in that if TFL do take over, it will be put onto the tube map, and that will help a lot of commuters, because you'll be surprised the amount of people that don't actually know about the services within South and South East London. And I'm mostly talking about people that don't live in the south of London, as people that are travelling to London for their holidays or that live in the north of London aren't aware of the railway services that are in the south of London, and use the tube map as their references to get around London. But yes, is it realistic TFL is going to take over these metro services and provide a metro type of services for these lines? Probably not, because the government seem to love these private companies. Plus, TFL aren't getting money for their services they have right now, let alone more money for services they don't own already. See, I don't think TFL's mindset and viewpoint is bad. I just think for the meantime, this could be achieved by the operators metronising their services they have currently. But I guess that has to kind of depend on the market and whether there's demand for these type of services on the railways, whether there are commuters for it. But in the meantime, what could be achieved is that the operators could provide metronisation by themselves. But I guess that would have to match with the supply and demand of the railways, meaning there has to be customers to travel on these high frequency trains. The ideal is nice though. The dream of turning up to a station without checking the train times, and the train will come to the platform within 7.5 minutes. But yes, that's the topic of TFL wanted to take over the metro services from national rail operators. But yes, what do you think if TFL actually went through with this and took over all the metro services? Are you a fan of it or not? Let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I feel like I've got bugs in me. Where did I notice that worm? I noticed a worm in my arm. Well, not a worm. I noticed something that looks like a tiny worm in my arm, but it wasn't moving. It was just like the shape of it. It's kind of like curled like that. I was bugging. I was like pressing it in my arm because I thought it could be a vein, but it wasn't where a vein would be. So I was like, what is going on? And a vein wouldn't be shaped like that. A vein's usually quite like straight. It has like a direction. This was like it curved. No veins really curve. So a bit confused, a bit worrying. I tried pressing it and just nothing happened. Luckily, it wasn't moving, but I kind of forgot where it was because this was like a day and a half ago.